The path to healing comes in taking those little tiny steps to make your life better. Hello, beautiful soul family. Britt Cannon here, host of the Walk On podcast, the podcast where I try to demystify spirituality, personal growth and healing, and whatever else I feel like talking about. This week's episode to kick off the holiday season is called How to Get Through the Holidays. And this topic is near and dear to my heart because, as I have mentioned several times before, I have complex PTSD and regular old PTSD from a very traumatic childhood, and the holidays have always been a heavy time for me. One, because of the sort of glorious nostalgia of the good times with my family. You know, even the most toxic family manages to pull it together somewhat around the holidays. Like, if you're part of one of those families, one of those abusive families where everything is swept under the rug, where you're expected to just like pretend like everything is okay, and where appearances are more important than the reality, then the holidays are usually a time for them to really pump up the volume on the pretending. And when you're a kid, you don't really know better. So the happiness feels genuine. It just feels like a magical time, and it feels like maybe for some who have similar experiences to mine, it's like those little moments of feeling like a real happy family. You know, where all the trouble kind of stays under the surface because everyone's cool with pretending. You know, everyone's able to pretend for like 1 to 5 to 10 days a year. You know what I mean? And as you get older, you start to get more and more disillusioned with the image. You know, you start to be less able to phone it in on the holidays. You start to be less able to participate the way you used to. Maybe even if you're the truth teller in a family like this, you start to call stuff out and you just can't stomach the pretending, you know? Or if it was just straight up fucking terrible, and if it was what I was just talking about where you like pretend, either way, you're stuck with trauma. Like, either way, the holidays can bring up triggers. It can bring up feelings of grief, resentment, loneliness. There's all kinds of just like heavy energy that exists at this time of year. And for me personally, it was like every year older I got, the more miserable the holidays felt. The more I realized how much I'd missed out on, the more I realized how disconnected my family was, the more I saw, you know, it's these like yearly check-ins with people where you understand what they're going through. You know the reality of the situation too much that you can't put it out of your mind for that one day a year. And also there's just the truth that as people, whether it's like addiction or abuse or a combination, unhealed trauma, whatever it might be, dysfunction in general, the passage of time just exacerbates these things, wherein which you're either healing or you're getting worse, pretty much. And that just became too heavy a truth for me to bear. And so whether it was trying to like spend time at my partner's family's house instead of my own family's, or just straight up not being able to go in the house because I was having panic attacks, like I just got more and more distant from my family until eventually during the holiday season, I started deciding to put distance. I started deciding, maybe not to the extent that I am no contact with them now, but it was the first steps during the holiday season. And it came from a suicide attempt waking up the next day and realizing that something had to change, that things were too bad to continue on the way I was. So near and dear to my heart, I know how hard this time of year is, and even post going no contact with my family, it's been about 5 years, 4.5, 5 years, which is a good amount of time. I talk in the podcast about how it no longer feels like an active choice I'm making. It feels like a choice I have already made. It feels like this is just my life now. And so that's a different experience, because for the last 4.5 years, it's felt very much like choosing it every day, just like recovery, like I would love for this to be something that I don't have to think about or consider anymore. And I can happily, gratefully say that that's where I am now. But in case you need help, in case you feel lonely, in case you feel that heaviness, in case you're feeling lost, hopeless, whatever heaviness, grief, resentment, maybe you lost a parent and you just feel the absence every year. Like whatever your case might be, I think it's 8. I have 8 tips in my teeny tiny notebook that I really thought about, and I just reflected on my journey and how every year since I walked away from my family, the holidays have gotten easier. The first couple years, boy, howdy, were they a doozy. It was rough. I got to a point where I just wanted to completely ignore them. So I would have to stay off social media. I'd have to lock myself in my house. I'd have to just really go hermit mode just to get through it, because I couldn't even acknowledge that they were happening. It was just far too painful. I was crying for extended periods. I was terribly depressed. I would always have flare-ups because the emotional stress would cause my body to freak out. Just heavy, hard times. I would sometimes go on these mini benders, drinking and partying, just trying to numb it out and just grit my teeth and get through it. And that's not even to say the hardship of when I was in contact with my family. So if you're out there struggling, I know how hard it is. I really feel for you. And these tips are just what worked for me through trial and error, and paying it forward to you. So the first tip for surviving the holidays is up the self-care. Take care of yourself. Whether it's bath time, whether it's an extra therapy session, journaling for a little longer in the mornings or right before bed, getting enough sleep. Rest is the next bullet point, but there's they're kind of intertwined in a lot of ways, because a lot of self-care revolves around rest, recovery. Drinking enough water, making sure you're getting your meals in, just really taking care of yourself, really babying yourself, and just understanding that when things are emotionally hard, it's really easy to let stuff go. It's really easy to stop taking care of ourselves, to be neglectful of ourselves. I talk about boundaries in this later on as well, and it can be really easy to just be it's much easier to give in and give too much than to fight for what I want or what I need. It's much easier to run myself ragged than to get the rest I need, or it's much easier to volunteer to do too much. It's much easier to be too busy. It's much easier to party too much, or what have you. And I think that is counterintuitive, or that's my dog. Jakey, it's okay. It's just the trash. It's okay. It's okay, Jakey. Speaking of emotional distress, my dog hates the trash collecting. So, Jake, please don't bark. So it's almost like you don't feel like you have the energy, you don't feel like you have the bandwidth to engage in self-care activities, but that's often when you need it the most. So just baby yourself. Be the parent you never had, but you so desperately needed. Give yourself reassurance. Connect with comfy spaces, comfy routines. You know, if you have like a comfort TV show or album or process, if you love to cook, like indulge in that. If you just want to stay in bed, give yourself what you need. Like just step up the self-care. Whatever your normal amount of self-care is, take it to the next fucking level because you're gonna need it and it's gonna help. That goes along with my next tip for surviving the holidays, and that is get lots of rest. When we're in a triggered state, we're in like our adrenaline is pumping and it sends us into adrenal fatigue. Like you exert so many of those hormones to just get through that traumatic experience that when you come out on the other side of it, you're just beat. I remember when I used to go to family functions, sometimes I would fall asleep at the function because just the emotional heaviness was so miserable and palpable that it would just knock me out. I would get migraines. I would get intense nausea. Like I can't even tell you. I've never felt as sick as I used to at these functions just because of the heavy energy. So I would need to sleep. When I was in my first days of healing, processing these heavy emotions, like after therapy, I would stay in bed sometimes for like 3 or 4 days after, doing the bare minimum to survive because my body just needed that much rest to recover. And that's okay. Stepping up the self-care and giving yourself the rest you need is a good thing. It's a self-loving act. And to lay there and guilt yourself and shame yourself and judge yourself for needing it is just like not the way to feel better. The path to healing comes in taking those little tiny steps to make your life better, those little tiny moves towards self-love, self-compassion, self-forgiveness, and really just like reparenting yourself. It's so profoundly healing, and it will help you get through this time without feeling totally run ragged by the end of it. But also, if you do feel totally run ragged by the end of it, give yourself a day, give yourself 3 days, give yourself a week of just like cocooning and taking care of yourself, getting enough sleep, whether it's 10 hours, 12 hours, do the rest. Like you're gonna need it to recharge your batteries, and that's okay. My next tip for getting through the holidays is clarifying your boundaries. So toxic families are not great with boundaries. Toxic people are not great with boundaries. They take them personally. They get angry with them. It causes defensiveness. It causes deflection. It causes like wanting to put blame because someone feels blamed. It's just like, it's a lot. So you have to kind of go into these interactions a little bit armed, meaning that if you are a people pleaser, if you're a fawner, your reaction to someone's negative reaction to your boundary is to just give in, right? Is to just give them what they want and get the conflict over with. So to avoid that happening, because that can tend to dredge up feelings of shame or regret after the fact, I should have stuck to my guns, I should have like been stronger, whatever. So to avoid these feelings, just clarify them to yourself. Like think about, how long can I engage with this particular toxic family member before I start to get anxious and irritable and exhausted? What topics do I feel comfortable discussing? What aspects of my life do I feel comfortable divulging? How vulnerable am I okay with being? How long can I stay at this function? How much am I willing to put into this function? How much money can I really spend at this holiday on gifts? Really consider these things. Clarify them for yourself in a journal. Just like get really, really clear so that you can, next tip for surviving the holidays, lay your boundaries. You clarify them first for yourself and then you lay them. This can be as covertly as just like looking at the time, deciding like I can give this person 15 minutes on the phone before I am a wreck. So you like set a little timer and you watch the timer, and when it gets to 15 minutes, you're like, oh no, I gotta go. It could be as like non-communicative as that, or you can say, if I'm going to come to this function, I really need everyone to like not ask me about my divorce. It's just like too vulnerable. I'm not ready to talk about it. And it just feels like everyone's prying and it's none of their business. I'll talk about it when I'm ready. So please, can you just ask everyone not to ask me about that? It can be direct as well. It can be laying boundaries with yourself, like, I'm going to leave the party right after dinner. I'm not going to drink at this to get through this function. Just like lay them with yourself, lay them with others, lay them gratefully and exuberantly and like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like hedonistically, like, you get a boundary, you get a boundary, you get a boundary, you get a boundary. Everyone gets a boundary, just like don't feel bad about it. Or at least if you do feel bad about it, understand that that's just your conditioning and that you have nothing to feel bad about, that it is your divine right as a human being on this earth, an autonomous human being, to lay boundaries and fucking do it. You got this. My next tip for surviving the holidays is find some joy. Try to circumvent those nasty, yucky feelings with a joyful memory. Create a new tradition. Meet up with people who see you, who love you, who respect you. Have a Friendsgiving, Go out to a movie with someone you love. Have a game night. Dance around your apartment. Like, draw a beautiful picture. Put on a great outfit and go out on the town. Like, whatever joy means to you, do it, and do it as much as you possibly can with respect to your rest. Don't go ham, don't go too hard. But I think it is really important to remember that holidays can be joyful, that we can define these things for ourselves, that we can create memories for ourselves. And it can be as low key or high key as you want it to be. It really is about what is joyful for you. If you have kids, sometimes they can bring back the light in holidays. And it doesn't have to be about gifts or money or how big the dinner is. It can just be spending quality time together. And, for me, last year, I spent Thanksgiving alone, and I love Thanksgiving food. And my favorite part used to be cooking all day with my grandma, watching the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, and just like preparing the meal, dancing around to Christmas music. And so I did that for myself. I was finally ready to celebrate the holiday and not just pretend it didn't exist. And so I made a playlist of all my favorite Christmas songs. I cooked a beautiful chicken. I made stuffing, gluten-free. I made mac and cheese. I was having the best time, and I did it alone. I rested, I watched my favorite Christmas movies, and I just had a fucking blast. And what that did is it rewired my brain. So now this year I'm looking forward to the holiday, even if it means spending time alone, where last year I was a bit daunted at the idea. This year I'm very much looking forward to it. So I've reprogrammed my brain to associate that particular holiday, which has always been a little bit heavy, a little bit stressful, a little bit triggering, a lot bit triggering, is now mine, right? I'm reclaiming it. The next tip for getting through the holidays is feel your feels. Honor the emotions that come up. I have an episode way back in the archives called What Our Triggers Teach Us, and I get more in depth with that back there. So go check that out if you haven't. But it's just about how being triggered isn't a bad thing. It isn't it doesn't have to be as world-rocking and scary as it is initially. If you can realize that what you're feeling is something that hasn't ever been felt before, to the extent, if you can think of it as sweeping, each time you're reminded of a traumatic event, or each time you come to and witness and like rediscover a traumatic event with more clarity, you're just sweeping up a little bit more dust. You know, you never get it all on the first sweep. You always have to scoot the dustpan back and sweep again and scoot it back and sweep again. It might take, 15 times depending on how much dog hair is on the ground. That's all you're doing. You're just going back and taking a little chunk and digesting it and taking a little chunk and digesting it and putting yourself back together. It's part of the process to feel our feelings. It's part of soul retrieval to feel our feelings, because when we were initially going through these things that caused the trauma in the first place, we couldn't fully process what was happening to us. Either we were too young and we didn't have any context, or we were dissociated because it was too scary, or whatever the reason, We often have to go back and revisit. And while that is scary and daunting, it's also really good for you if you can do it safely. And that might mean investing in the help of a therapist or in self-help content like this, or there's lots and lots of books about healing trauma. I have an episode way back called The Books That Helped Me Heal. You can check that out and check those out. There are ways to do it with help safely, but it's really important to feel your feels. If you have to go home and collapse and have a good cry, do that. If you have to get angry and vent to someone, find someone safe who has the wherewithal to be there for you as you do that. Just honor those feelings, understand they're trying to show you something, When we get angry, it's oftentimes because a boundary has been violated and we feel the need to defend ourselves. When we get sad, it's because we feel lonely or abandoned, or because we're not getting what we need. When we feel resentful, it means that, again, we're not getting what we need, something isn't being met or addressed in the way that we need it to. And so our emotions are telling us something. And so when we feel them, it can lead us to the wound itself, and we are presented with the opportunity to do a little bit of healing. So feel your feelings. My next tip for surviving the holidays is ask for what you need. I talked a lot about this in the episode, so if you want to know more, go give it a listen. But this is about if you need a friend, if you need support, if you need someone to check in on you because after an event you're going to be totally rocked, then just be hey, just be vulnerable and be hey, I really need someone to come over after Thanksgiving dinner. Do you think you could do that for me? Or would you mind if I called you, just answering the phone or calling me back because I just need some company? Or I'm feeling really lonely and, I need a friend, or I need to be held while I cry, or whatever it is. It sounds silly, but I think sometimes we ask for help in a really hands-off kind of way because we want to avoid being vulnerable, but we want help. And then people don't know how serious it is, how much we need it. And they don't know that how important it is for them to show up for you in that moment. And so a way to avoid the perceived rejection of not being helped the way you need is to be as vulnerable as you need to be with a trusted person and allow them to give you that, allow them to know what's going on in your head. It doesn't mean, if you don't answer my call, I'm going to do something bad to myself or something like that. It's not an ultimatum. It's just a hey, I'm really struggling right now, and would you mind getting coffee with me and talking some things through? Or, I could use some words of affirmation. I need someone to tell me I'm doing the right thing here, or whatever, just go where you're supported and ask for what you need. My last tip for surviving the holidays is give yourself credit. Where you have survived, where you have been resilient, where you have learned, where you have healed, where you have laid boundaries, where you have taken care of yourself, where you have rested, where you have listened to your intuition, listened to your body's signals, where you have felt your feelings, where you have progressed as a person, where you have recovered. Give yourself credit. throw yourself a party, especially at this like end of the year sort of time where we're like thinking of all the ways that we can be better. I don't think that we often stop to take account of all the ways that we have become better, right? What the work we have already done. And it's really important to continue on the next leg of the journey to stop and take inventory of how far we've come. My little note here says, you are amazing. You are not alone. If you're like me and you're no contact with your family and you have been building community, building chosen family, creating new traditions for yourself, congratulations. If you're just getting to the point where you're brave enough to lay boundaries and stop people pleasing in your life, congratulations. If you're learning how to reparent yourself and take care of yourself, you're doing amazing, sweetie. Just write yourself a love letter, give yourself some credit because you're doing a great job. Thank you so much for watching and listening. I hope you have a happy holiday. If you are looking for a gift to get someone, you can buy a tarot reading for me. I do a yearly tarot spread where we talk about all 12 months, what to expect. I can incorporate the astrology if you would like. I also have a great book here called Flight of the Final Girl that I just released. That's all about my journey with my own trauma, with my own toxic family, told through the lens of horror. It's a postmodern poetic memoir, and it has been a labor of love, and I would really appreciate if you would read it. You can like, share, subscribe, all that. You can check out my website, brittcannon.me. I got some pretty cool merch. And you can listen to the full episodes of this podcast. You can check me out on Instagram at Brit_that's_it. Twitter's the same thing, but with an extra underscore. And the podcast page is walk_on_pod. I also have an art and poetry YouTube called Brit Cannon that you can check out if you'd like to see more of me. And I just thank you so much for being here, for sharing energy with me, and for continuing to do your best every day. Thanks so much. Happy healing. Bye.